is Wayne and Mark. And as Mark said earlier, we're both excited, and we just do that. That's us. And we got Mark B behind the glass in Bangladesh, and the birds will start singing soon in his place. And so Mark is in week, boy, we still don't know the exact number, but it's in the late 30s of forest ecology. And Mark, it's all yours.
All right, and actually was going to go into regeneration ecology, is the study and the understanding of how systems, populations reproduce and propagate and continue on sustainably all by themselves without our messing with it. But last week, I forget who it was, I think it was Sam, was asking some really good questions about stem density and planting. I don't know if it was Sam or not, but somebody was asking really good questions, and I gave some fairly quick answers. And you know, after the webinar, you can't think of everything all at once, or at least I'm not able to do that. After the webinar, I thought a lot more. It's like, you know, there's a lot more to it than just some of the simple answers that I was putting out. And so this week, I kind of like have focused all on planting density and stem density. And so, how come my machine's not advancing, Wayne? Oh, there we go. I got it. So, a little bit more on stand density. Look at how dispersed, diffuse these woody plants are. This is oak savanna, obviously. Between 30 and 60% canopy closure. You get full-size canopies, wide open-grown trees. They grow faster that way. They put on a lot more total biomass. They produce a lot more nuts. You get grass underneath. This is a ecological system in and unto itself, is the savanna phase. It's a mid-successional phase. So remember that there's selection pressures at all stages of a plant's life. But they're most effective on seedlings, and they will eliminate individuals that aren't adapted to the immediate environment. So when they eliminate individuals, the individuals left behind are now the population, and it's the genetics of that population that we want to have to be sustainable long term. So we want to make sure that we have a broad diversity of genetics to choose from. And we want to make sure that somewhere in that gene pool, we've got the magic combinations that will help us fulfill our values on our site. And what my values might be are different possibly than your values. I'm obviously focused on the agricultural yields side of things. To me, it's all about food. Food, 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 food. If you're not into food, stop eating, and we'll talk about this when you're interested in food again. But selection pressure, that's like this generic term. What are these selection pressures? We got plants on a site. What are the things that are likely to cause that plant to die? Some of the most significant, of course, are latitude, how far north, how far south, elevation, how high up on the side of a mountain, how far down in the valley, soil type, is it a gravelly, sandy, silt, loam, clay? Is there adequate rainfall? Well, rainfall distribution is just as important. 45 inches of rain that comes in 2 thunderstorms is not the same as a ½ inch of rain scattered out to give you your 45 inches of rain. So all these different, factors play into how these plants survive on the site. So knowing these different selection pressures, one of the things I wanted to address about stand density, what I want to do is I want to plant as many stems per acre that I possibly can and make sure that it's the site selecting against that plant instead of fellow plants selecting against one another. I want it to be the temperature, the weather, the sun, the lack of sun, the water, the soil type, the pH. I don't want it to be competition between my crop plants, my crop trees. And crop trees for me are primarily the nut and fruit producing trees. And so how do we know and how to make decisions to manage that stand density to favor our plants? Just so happens I'm down in North Carolina right now. I'm working on a project laying out a stand density issue. We're going to be doing a strip cut. We can talk about that a little bit later. And I'm right down the road from a project that I was working on earlier when I was given a webinar that's up in Virginia, Southern Virginia. Here in North Carolina, what a coincidence. Across the street from me today, there's all these trucks around, and the local wildlife federation or whatever it is, they're out doing a controlled burn underneath the pine. I think I have any photographs of it here, but it's pretty cool. And they have some nifty little handouts that I got, and I'm going to use this as a lot of the props for tonight. And so what we have is this situation here. We have all of these stems, crazy dense with stems. They will start to die. Some will start to die. Some will start to become dominant. The ones that aren't dominant are suppressed. The suppressed ones will eventually, just disappear. So it's into that stem thinning phase. What is thinning? And this refers. This pamphlet is particularly about pines, but these principles apply to all species that I'm aware of. And the thinning is the removal of certain trees from the stand in order to regulate the number, the quality, and the distribution of the remaining crop trees. If we can cut stuff and sell it, that's a commercial thinning. If we don't have a market for the trees that we remove, that's called pre-commercial thinning. So although I'm growing agricultural crops, horticultural crops, I'm doing it as if they were a natural resource property, a timber property, except that I'm going to be managing it slightly different. Instead of managing my New Forest farm like a orchard, I'm managing it more like a forest, and disturbing it as close to its natural historic disturbance pattern that I can for those particular species. So we're going to thin. What's the process for thinning? This is some of the stuff that's really mind-blowing, is that a particular site will only produce so much wood, biomass as trees. It'll either have a lot of small trees or a few larger trees. So knowing this, that we're going to have a fixed volume, we now have our choice as to where do we allocate this solar energy. When the sun's coming in, our site is going to capture the sun. How much do we want in grass? How much do we want in cane fruits? How much do we want in shrubs? How much do we want in vines? How much do we want in trees? What kind of fruit trees, nut trees, timber trees? Then we decide how to manage that, and we try to keep it. If you remember that kind of that S curve from way a few weeks ago, we want to keep our stand right in the middle of the growth curve. It takes time to get established, and then it's maximum optimum growth right here. Then it kind of slows down. We want to keep it in that sweet spot in the middle where it's the most productive. How do we make some of those determinations? Here's another tidbit that I thought was really fascinating, is that of course, the growth of the tree is influenced by stand density. If you have a tree in the woods or out in the open, it has to have at least 30% of its height in live crown, whether it's needles or leaves, about 30% of the total height for optimal growth. It'll have 30% or more of its total height in green. Now, in a savanna situation, we can have way more than 30%. We can have green from almost ground level all the way up 100 feet. That would be the fastest we could actually have it growing. But we want at least 30% and try to manage it and maintain it at 30%. And then here we go again. How do we make a quantitative measurement? One of the tools that we can use, we talked about this a few weeks ago, is the basal area. We can use whatever our tool to figure out the basal area. What I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight is the site gauge. I think that's my next slide. I'm not entirely sure. So we can use basal area as an excellent stand density tool. Now it's the basal area or basal area, whether you like pesto or not. It's it's the flat square footage, the area of a tree at 4.5 feet above the ground. So if you cut it off at 4.5 feet above the ground, and you measured the surface area of that, then add up all the tree's surface area across that acre, you'll get a number that's the basal area. This is the tool. This is a site gauge, basal area gauge. You take this little black thing right here and you put it in your teeth. The chain is a very specific, what's it, 26.5 inches, something like that. It's 25 inch. You get a 25-inch long chain, and then you look through this gauge, and you hold it out in front of you, and you turn in a circle, and if the tree fills up that gauge, and I'm going to use the number 10 here. This is a 5 gauge, a 10 gauge, 20. Then you flip it sideways to get your 40. Just depends on the size of your trees. I like the 10 because I can do math by 10. I can count by 10. I can do multiply by 10. You look through this gauge, and every tree that fills that up or is bigger than that, you count as one tree. So you just take this and you turn it around and around and around. You count the total number of trees, and you multiply it by the gauge number. And so let's say you find 9 trees that fill that 10 gauge right there. 9 times 10 is 90. You'll have a basal area of 90 square feet per acre on that particular plot. And what's fascinating about the basal area number, I don't know if I mentioned it before, shut your phone, is that basal area basically will hit a maximum of around 150, 160. It usually doesn't go above that. So it doesn't matter if you have 10 million little sticks or 4 or 5 gigantic trees, that your site will eventually go towards its optimum. Poorer sites will have a lower potential basal area versus richer sites will have a higher potential basal area. But say 140-ish is about maximum for a good site that you can ever expect for your basal area. What I like about this tool is we're hardwired, we're manufactured with one. Have you ever heard of what's called the rule of thumb? One of the things about the rule of thumb is that if I, because my arm is a certain length, put my elbow slightly bent just like this, and I look at my thumb, it's about 3/4 of an inch across. It's approximately a 10 gauge basal area site gauge. And I can look around in a circle around me, and if a tree sticks out on either side of my thumb at all, that counts. It's a hit. It's a 1, 2, 3. And so I just spin around in a circle, and I count all the trees that add up in that thumb. So you can see here that, you know, this tree maybe will do it, this for sure, this for sure. You just kind of spin around and you count. This particular site had large enough trees that we could use it as a measurement. Basal area doesn't work when you have, it doesn't work as an accurate measurement when you have a lot of smaller stems, which is a lot of what I've been dealing with lately. So way to thin, this is what I was looking at right here. The goal of thinning is if you get between 60 and 110 square feet for basal area, your trees are going to have plenty of room around them, and they're going to be able to grow as fast as they possibly can. Right here, the basal area by site typically stabilizes at around 150 square feet. You can't get that much, any more wood than that on it. So when to thin is when you start to exceed, 80-ish, 80, 90-ish basal area. How I thin, I'm doing it slightly differently. I'm looking at grass growth. Once the grass is no longer healthy and vigorous growing, and it starts to get holes and bare patches of soil between it, or leaves or needles packed down there, and you start to get duff layer, it's going too far, because the grass is important to feed the animals. The animals are important for fertility, cycling, obviously, and for pest and disease control. So typically, I haven't done a basal area measurement at my place yet. I probably should or can. I'm willing to bet it's probably in the 70 or 80 at the most, because there's enough light between the trees for the grass to grow really well. And they're usually not applied to pre-commercial thinning basal area guidelines because the trees are just too doggone small, and you use your sight, your sight gauge or your thumb, and you're kind of looking around. A professional forester is not going to use his thumb. He's going to use his tool. But really, for you and I, we're going out to the farm. We want to do some basic measurement. And if your thumb is not 3/4 of an inch across, don't sweat it. If your arm it doesn't reach out or reaches out too far, don't sweat it. We're just looking for a ballpark figure, something that we can use as a guideline to inform our management. One of the things that this is talking about here is if we've got a stand that's like all these young trees, and quite frankly, some of the probably the most worthless real estate that you could possibly get is clear cuts or land that is just come back from a clear cut 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years after a clear cut, because there's no current cash flow value that you can really get out of that property at all. Clear cuts are not generally thought to be beautiful and scenic, and so they're junk land, and typically a lot of them are formerly owned by large, maybe industrial landowners or just larger landowners that are trying to, they liquidate all the timber, get some cash, then sell the land, just get some more cash for whatever they want to use, buy yachts or stuff. So it's usually really affordable land. So I'm working a lot with people who have a lot of this really rapid young regrowth, and you really can't do a good basal area using a sight gauge, and there's nothing really in some of these plots, nothing that you can get any value out of, that you couldn't just call a logger and have them come in and do a pre-commercial thinning for you. They can't get any revenue from it, so it's going to cost you money if you buy a clear cut and deal with this land, unless you start doing some of the techniques we're talking about with restoration agriculture. Is we're going to use the agriculture to cash flow through the years and to gain value right now and to justify doing the work that we're doing. We'll do thinning because it's going to be promoting a mast species, and here on this site in North Carolina we've got beech, hickory, and oaks for nut production. So of course we'll have grass. There's already loblolly and longleaf pine that have been planted on it, so they eventually will come into market age, and when they start to compete with our crop trees, we'll go ahead and remove them. This is a great place for growing pecans. We'll probably be planting a lot of pecans here and a lot of chestnuts as well. One of the techniques is to do a thinning at a more efficient and cost-effective way is to do a strip cut. And this here says go ahead and use a chipper or a brush hog, and you go a 7 to 8 foot parallel swaths, leaving 1 to 3 foot wide strips of standing trees. Well, what we're doing is we're going to start the restoration agriculture process is all about water management. So we're going to measure the size of the area of the land. We'll figure out what kind of rain is coming down, what seasons does it come in? Is it thunderstorms? Is it gray drizzlies? And then determine what type of water management system we would need, what type of swales and berms, pocket ponds, terraces, etc. And then we go in and we do a strip cut and remove a strip of trees that's as wide as our alley. Then we'll leave a row of trees and then cut another strip and leave a row of trees. So at this site right here in North Carolina, we actually have a logging company that's going to come in and do this logging. There's enough small diameter material that they can sell pulp logs. So the landowner's not going to make any money off of this, but the loggers will at least get paid by the landowner and have some timber to sell. So it's a little bit sweeter deal for the loggers instead of just getting rid of thin material. And what's great about that is all of a sudden we have somebody who's going to come in and clear our alleys for us instantly, right away. And because this was only a clear cut 15 or 20 years ago, there's still residual grasses all over the place, and the grass will bounce back really quick, and we'll immediately have grazing available. Literally 2 months from now, we'll be able to get some livestock out here helping the whole system along. So the best alternative here, as they're saying, is doing it like a strip cut. This was the site I was at earlier this fall, and I just went to visit it yesterday in Southern Virginia. They used the forestry mulcher it's a skid steer size forestry mulcher with a 8-foot wide head. And so all we did is we took the forestry mulcher, we did one pass down, following the whole water management pattern, and one pass back. Then we leave a width of the forestry mulcher, then one pass down, one pass back, one down, one back. And as you can see in here, there's still grass right there. So this grass will bounce back really, really quick. We cleared off this site here because that's where the pond number 1, that's the initial pond that charges the whole system, starts at. So that's one example of the strip cut. These trees were only 5 to 7 years old. The loblolly pine was planted. Everything else is advanced regeneration. It's oak, there's persimmon, there's sweet gum, tulip poplar, some silver maple. There's some beech, some hickory. Here's another example of doing a strip cut. This is the same property, but this was a previous, an earlier clear cut area. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So probably about 20 to 25 years from clear cut. When you have loblolly pine in the south that's only that big at age 20, it's either a poor site or it's lousy genetics. The soil here isn't all that bad. It's a heavy, heavy, heavy sticky clay. So that might be part of the issue. Plus, this was tobacco all the way back to at least back to the Civil War on this particular site. So this property had been farmed to death. All of the primary valleys are massively eroded, leaving this farm. And so it would have been one cycle ago. So it was probably just before World War II that it was abandoned as agricultural land and planted to trees and managed as a timber property. This little tree guard is protecting a persimmon. So when you have this clear cut or this regeneration from clear cut, now we have this row of trees. This is where we select our crop trees, whether it's for timber or whether it's for mast. We're gonna, and right here is our fruit. We're gonna be doing some breeding with persimmons on this particular site because they have so many. And there's one persimmon. It's easily was 2-inch diameter fruit on this thing. It was ridiculously sweet. So we're going to start saving that seed. So that rule of thumb, another measurement that we can use to figure out our crop tree density is the distance between this tree and its neighbor. And it's a silly, simple little rule: 1.75 times the diameter. You got a 1.75 times the diameter of the tree, at chest height, 4.5 feet off the ground, 6-inch diameter tree, you should have about 10 feet between trees. 10-inch diameter, you should have 17 feet between trees. This is minimum distances for fast growth. 14-inch diameter, having 25 feet between trees. And then this tells you how many trees per acre. I put this up here on purpose because this little pamphlet, I mean, just like 3 pages, is just jam-packed with amazing, super helpful tips, not just for growing timber. It's intended for the timberland owner. But this works for us too. And there's the special little thing right here. If you guys look for an ultimate spacing, this is what we're looking for. The smaller the trees, the closer they can be together. So obviously if this is 6 inches in diameter, what if my tree is not even 4.5 feet tall? It's a little tiny seedling. We can put way more per acre. And if you looked at that, the other, I think it's coming up. This one right here, we could have thousands of stems per acre. And as long as we continue to remove stems as they grow in diameter, we can keep it in that fast growth phase. We want to be aware certain trees will tolerate suppression, be it shade or nutrient and moisture robbing. Others will be just fine in the shade in the understory. Beech is a prime example. Since we have some around here, they produce nuts. It's a super hard wood. It's good for growing certain kinds of mushroom. It can really tolerate a lot of shade. It will respond fairly moderately to release. That's another thing with trees. Release is when you go ahead and you remove its competition from around it. If you have less than 30% of the tree height is green, it won't respond as quickly to release. If you have a tree that's already one of the dominant trees in the spot, it's already a dominant tree, it really won't accelerate much if you remove it. The ones that really do are like the codominants and just barely subdominants before they've been suppressed. They'll really respond to a thinning. In crown and bole development, the bole is the trunk of the tree. Do we want to favor crown development? Like on chestnuts, I'm allowing them to spread and get wide and crazy because I want as much green as I possibly can, and eventually they'll be very widely spaced. I don't necessarily need a nice straight tall trunk. The stand structure, I'm primarily having the stand structure, the shape and the pattern is following the water management pattern, which is intended to optimize hydration on the soil across the site. If we get 30 inches of rain in a course of a year, I don't want it all going down the primary valleys and washing away. I don't want to have some gullies like Phil has right next door to him. There's agricultural land, I think it was north of Lake Huron, that it's washing away subdivisions, these streams, flash flooding when you got this bare black dirt field that's compacted, soil structure collapse, no vegetation, no roots holding in place, gets hit with a thunderstorm, flash floods, and it's eroding through the bluffs down to, I was going to say Hudson Bay, but it's not Hudson Bay, like Huron. And then, of course, the growth and reproductive characteristics, I'm favoring plants that have delicious fruit, lots of nuts. I'm not necessarily personally concerned about nut size. I don't need a chestnut that's this big. I want to have more total pounds of chestnuts per acre, or hazelnuts or pine nuts, whatever it is. I really don't care what size it is. So here's a situation here. This is a old pasture that was direct seeded to hardwoods. And as you can see, they're very close together. They are at the stage where they are starting to compete with one another severely. There's a number of these in here that have been suppressed. Obviously, there's some that are bigger. This is big and straight and tall. There's also some that are crooked. They're reaching for the sun. There's this one, it's got multiple branches over here. So there's all different kinds of growth characteristics. What will happen when they hit this stem exclusion stage is that all of them will generally slow down their growth simply because of the competitive effects going on. So instead of optimizing the site and having a basal area of 150 or so, they all start to lose crown and they all start to slow down and they're not growing as fast as they could. It's not the end of the world. It's fine if that's what you want. Just leave it be. But if we're in the farming business, our job is to maximize or optimize our photosynthetic capture. So we want to have as deep three-dimensional green that we possibly can. One way to do that is to get in here and start thinning before we have these lower branches start to die off because of excessive shade. One way to do, so this right here is also impossible to do with your basal area gauge because I put my thumb out there and I don't count a single tree, so according to basal area, there's no trees here whatsoever, according to using the prism or the sight gauge. However, what you can do, which is what we did, is we go out there and take if you watch the cursor on the screen, if this photograph of this graph paper is a field, for example, we'll start at one end of the field and we just started doing a zigzag like this, and zigzag across, and across, and across, and across, and every 10th tree, regardless of how big it was, you just put cloth measuring tape around that and we write down the circumference. And then once we got down this end, we didn't do the perimeter, so we'd kind of bounce off the perimeter. And you go back here and you zigzag the other way. And the idea is to get this as randomly as possible, just to get an overall idea on what your average diameter is, or your average circumference. And of course, circumference divided by pi divided by 2 is the radius. Square the radius, pi times pi, gives you the area. And so the average stump area is 0.31 per stem. Then we can add all those up and do our basal area calculations. But look at how packed these trees are. We have to make some decisions here. And when you put seeds in the ground right next to each other, what is causing this tree to be suppressed and be small? Perhaps it's competition from not enough moisture. Perhaps it's shade. It's getting shaded out by others. Obviously, this one's growing fastest. So if we're looking for wood alone, right there is making wood faster. We could remove these, and they wouldn't compete with that. However, one of the reasons why this tree might be suppressed, and this is what I face with the chestnuts all the time. Hazelnuts not so much because they're shrubs, but the chestnuts for sure. I've noticed that some of the more productive of nuts, more productive the trees are, the less energy they put into making wood. And if you think of what a tree, it's going to partition its resources. Some is going to be for current growth, some is going to be for reproduction, and some is going to be for root storage to survive till next year. And so how that tree divvies up those resources, if it's putting 30, 30, 30, it's pretty even. But if it's putting 50% of its photosynthesis into making nuts, all of a sudden it can suffer. It can either not be as cold hardy, or it just is not as competitive because it's not putting on as much wood. And although I've got some chestnut trees that are growing like this, although that's really cool, have big pieces of chestnut log, I want the heavier nut producers to dominate. So I'll typically go and I'll remove the more timber type chestnuts, because I also know that in hybrid chestnuts, which most of mine are hybridized now because we have Americans and Chinese and Europeans and Japanese, and they're pollinating whoever they want to pollinate. I know that the chestnut trees that grow straight and tall like an arrow, like 99.999% of those, they look American, they get chestnut blight. And so I go ahead and I'll remove those for mushroom logs before they ever start to get blight. Here's an example with oak. Is look at how small this tree is. Either it's the wrong tree for the site, it's not adapted to the soil, whatever the issues are, or it's producing so many acorns that it's not putting it into wood and survival to muscle its way in among with the other ones. Here's a beautiful, beautiful example right here. These are all planted here, 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 and here. Now, what if you had planted your trees 8 to 10 foot apart, like is recommended by the DNR in Wisconsin anyways? If you plant, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trees, right? That would be 70 feet if you're putting them 10 feet apart. What if 1, 2, 3, 4 of those trees are genetic duds? You just played Yahtzee with too few dice. What we want to do is we want to find the trees like this, whether it's timber, like in that particular oak right there, or whether it's nut production. We want to find the super magic trees, so we have this intense stem density when they're little, and then we thin them out as the competitive effects start to become apparent. Places where your competitive effects will become apparent really, really fast. It's especially important in dry areas with very little rainfall and or sandy soil, not to plant as dense as this, for example. Because what will happen is these little trees will go and they'll suck out all of the available surface water because their roots are so small they can't go down any further. They suck it all dry, and every single one of them dries out, and then they die. Whereas if you're a little bit wider apart in the drier and sandier areas, they can spread their roots out and they can capture a little bit more moisture and they have a higher chance of surviving. So back off on stem density if you're in a drier or sandier site. A place that will also be merciless on trees is where hyper cold is an issue, either super high elevation or northern southern latitudes. Well, in that case, instead of backing off the number of trees, we want to go ahead and plant even more trees because the cold will sting them. I think it was close to 1,000 butternut seed that I planted my homestead up on the mountain in Alaska, just shy of tree line, almost at the Arctic Circle. So not only did it have high latitude, it had high altitude and in a high latitude. Out of the 1,000 or so butternut seeds that I planted, half a dozen made it through a couple of seasons. 4 years ago, I think it was, when I went back there, I saw 2 of them. And what was fascinating, they're about 3.5 inches tall. So it's like a 25-year-old tree, 3.5 inches tall. So we found the ones that can survive the cold. They're growing on permafrost. Amazing tree. Is it ever going to be productive and produce lots of nuts? No idea. It's not dead. Not dead. It is obviously this one. Look at how its branches went right through. All these other stems just died back. Two. So we want to be observing what are the values that we're selecting for. Are we selecting for timber? Are we selecting for nuts? Are we selecting for grass? There's obviously not enough grass growing in here if you're going to graze animals. So this needs to be opened up. Which trees are we going to remove? Are we going to remove a walnut? Well, walnut will produce nuts. They're not really easy for pigs to eat except for old, mature adults. It does make a fairly valuable lumber, except that this is such a large diameter that already if we go ahead and start trimming these branches off, the scar is going to be so big that the scar of that branch will be visible 20 years from now when the log gets harvested for timber. So this one might just get removed. It's a decent firewood, not incredible, except for the fact we got all these little stunty runties. Maybe we will just trim it up and let it dominate that site. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Some of the things that happen with high density is this tree on the left has had full sun. It could just spread out and grow all over the place and just trying to maximize its solar panel. Whereas this one right here grew next to others in the row. So when we plant high density and have a wide row, instead of a single row, have like a wide row like at the one in Virginia that I was showing there, 8 foot wide, we've got a number of trees that are standing close together. The only place that they can go for light is straight up. So that will foster the development of a nice straight trunk down below. Then once they hit a certain height, let them go 12 to 16 feet high if you've got a timber tree, such as walnut, for example, or pecan. Then let it develop this big round crown just like this. If you go ahead and plant like that walnut back here, that walnut dominated so fast and so early, it had all the sun that it wanted, and oftentimes it just loses the central leader and it gets more and more bifurcated and divided up. Whereas a tree with some competition will tend to have a straight tall leader that tries shooting straight up for the sun. So this is like a polarity. We want to balance this. We want to balance maximum surface area of green for maximum total photosynthetic productivity, and we also want to maximize to a certain extent stem growth, because we do want some timber. Building nice cabinets or a coffin or a coffee table or firewood. It's a lot easier to split firewood that's straight and tall, and even small diameter, or for mushroom logs, etc. These are a real nuisance to deal with. So this is full sun, grown in full sun. This is grown with competition. So like in the systems that I've been doing, that I just showed pictures of, we'll have a high density, a reasonable amount of competition in the early years, let them stretch for the light, and then we start thinning out over time. Now it says my signal is doing poorly. You guys having problems?
No, you're good, Mark.
Okay.
You got any of you are missing him, throw something in, but no, you're doing fine.
I just got I got that warning message from the computer. So this is at the site in Southern Virginia at stand initiation and establishment phase. It's just getting established. The grass is still growing. It's not completely closed canopy yet. It's about to reach this phase here where it just starts dying all over the place. The trees here have all slowed down. There is more wood being produced here. If these trees were reproductive, there'd be more seed potentially being produced here, because all these trees they're like this guy right here is 100% green, 100% green. They've got full canopy. They're going to grow like crazy. This is hyperspace, really fast growth, where they all start to slow down here. It's a mess to deal with, not very recreational. Uh-oh. I got another error message, and I'm going to stop my webcam.
Yeah, you're still coming across good, Mark, but maybe if you're getting the messages, stop the webcam. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you still have the screen?
Still have the screen. That's good.
Okay.
Got it.
I will continue.
STEM exclusion.
Yep. Now, how do we insert ourselves into the STEM exclusion stage? We've got this, young recovery from clear cut. We've seen these pictures before. We're going to do a chainsaw. If you haven't already done so, take a FISTA chainsaw safety course. Here's where you do it. They're basically the largest, most widespread Canada and US. I don't know other countries besides that if FISTA deals with them. Use a sharp saw, your hearing protection. See, the thing is, you can tough it out and all that kind of stuff, but man, your eyes are important. Your ears are really important. I plan on using my ears when I'm 90 and 100 years old, so always wear your hearing protectors and your face shield. Your face shield in this device, lovingly called a brain bucket, can save your life. I have my last brain bucket got split, and I have no idea what happened because I just sat up on the ground and I was not wearing my helmet, and the helmet was cracked right in half, and I was fine. So every once in a while things happen and you have no idea. Use your safety gear. So here's that stand again. We're going to go in and mark the trees that we want to keep, remove everything else. Now we've set this up. This is good to go in perpetuity now. There's going to be enough sun coming in that grass will grow, all this stuff will decompose. We have some sweet gum and tulip poplar that are in there, and a bunch of oaks that are in there. Notice that the oaks still have a nice, straight, tall central leader. That's because they've been in the competition. They've been reaching for the sun. That's a good sign there. There's a hickory over here. Sweet gum and silver maples, red maples at this particular site. Not too many sugar maples. We'll let them stay there as long as they're not really suppressing too much anything else. They sprout back from the root really vigorously. So as soon as these guys on that one right there reach 4 to 6 inch diameter, we'll take that down and use that for oyster mushrooms. And then it'll sprout up more. These other stems will start to grow faster. We can coppice that stump forever. It'll always come back. Well, as our oaks and hickories start to grow, they'll start to slow down the sweet gum. And that's not a big deal because we're just growing this as a fast return for mushroom logs. Here's that site again. And then you see how we went through 1, 2, 1, 2. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go in the individual rows and thin that out. That's what it looked like after we ran through with the mulcher. Now here is the, let's go back to this site right here. That spot right there is the pond that is the highest elevation pond that basically charges the rest of the system. That's this right here. Now, if you see this tree line, there's a valley over there, so all of the water from, close to 20 acres of land just runs down that valley and goes away. This valley, all the water used to run down this valley and go away. So what we did is by using some strategically located terraces, swales, and berms, we have all the water from all the way back here, slowly low at a 1% slope, curves around here and fills a pond. This pond has only been excavated since late September, maybe early October, and that's what it's gotten. So this shelf is at 3 feet deep. We construct these ponds, certain ponds, to be self-cleaning, which means about 50% of your surface area will be 3 feet deep or shallower, and 50% of your surface area will be 6 foot deep or deeper. That way you won't get emergent weeds in the deep part, and you'll have all kinds of emergent weeds in the shallows. Fish will be able to spawn in the shallows. That'll be the water purification part, are the shallow areas. And then when this is full, it spills off that way. But I want you guys to pay attention to these strips here, because we're going to come back to those. And notice how thick they are. This is, like I said, 16 feet with the mulcher, then 8 feet of trees. 16 feet, 8 feet. This is the site right there. The pond is right there. So that pond is this. Now this water used to go down that valley, and it's gone. This water would go down that valley. This water goes down that valley. This water would go down there. This is ridge. It's just a ridge form right in the center. All the water would just bleed off of this. Well, we can just catch that by simply just dragging a little line like this, take it all the way out to the end of the ridge, and then we'll spread it across this broad, flat part of the ridge, and we'll spread it across this piece. And so there's just currently right now, this is the status of this job in Virginia. This pond is full. This one is just under construction right now. And these lines here are intended to be perfectly level. So when these ponds fill, instead of them overflowing down the valley, their spillway is this level sill all the way across the ridge. So this ridge gets a sheet of water, and this ridge will also get a sheet of water, and then off in that direction as well. And anytime we cross a little primary valley, we pop in a little pocket pond. I wanted to put that in there just because we just did this today, and that's where a lot of these pictures are from. Now your next tool for doing some thinning, it's I call it a brush saw. Clearing saw is also what I've heard of it. It's basically a heavy-duty weed eater with this piece, the cross piece, and it comes with a harness that you hang it on yourself. It comes with a blade that, quite frankly, sucks. Get a carbide-tipped table saw blade, and if you use it with a swinging motion that swings this way, the blade will pull the small diameter material into here, and just by swinging it and going pop, you can zip through inch and a half diameter material, just clip right through it. If you try to saw, you'll wear yourself. It doesn't work. Wear yourself out. It doesn't really work all that well. Just get it and you swing it down. And you go pop, pop. So zing, you hear somebody on a good brush saw like that. They can literally clear an acre of brush in a day with that tool. They're $700-800. Don't be afraid to spend money on good equipment that does the job professionally instead of like, oh, homeowner special, plastic man. So what we see here is this is the 16-foot wide alley, 8-foot wide row, 16-foot wide alley. And in this area right here, these are some of the pines that were planted a number of years ago. And so we went through with the brush saw and removed competition from these pines. There really weren't a lot of other species in there, useful species, such as here where we have oaks that are in the row. And just notice how much brushier these rows are over there. So what we'll do is you just go through, walk along, and just pop through this. And the guy who's managing this property here, Marcus is the guy, I guess, primarily on the forestry mulcher and the brush saw. On rainy days when it's too wet to use whatever his equipment out around the rest of the farm, he just grabs the brush saw and starts thinning out trees. And when you're in here, not only you can remove these basal sprouts, you can prune up a little bit, but once again, keeping in mind you want about at least 30% of the tree in active green. These oaks also coppice well. There's like this oak over here. You might want to only remove 1 or 2 stems out of a cluster, and you remove strategically through the years. You can have a continuous supply of mushroom logs and firewood with that. Now that a little bit of clearing is done here, we'll go ahead and we'll measure the gaps in between. We don't necessarily want to grow pine as our long-term crop, but what the heck, it's already here. Why waste it? Well, let's go ahead and we'll put in our chestnuts here. Maybe we could put blueberries here. Maybe we want to do hazelnut. Whatever your choice. Maybe we want to do more oaks. Blueberries would probably be a really good crop to put in here, and because they're so close to the pond, you'd have irrigation water in case of a dry summer. And if you've got good eyes, you can see how there's a little bit of a haze of green in the alleys. That's because as soon as the alleys were made, they were seeded with a pasture mix. And here's just the difference between a row that's not been thinned out. We're going to get rid of the sweet gum over there. You don't need it interfering with our oak. And if there were pines interfering with our oaks, we're favoring hard mast and oak, beech, pecan. And then over here, we'll go add in trees. So on this site, we're going to go through and count the gaps. And that'll tell us how many trees to plant. If there's an oak there, we don't have to plant a chestnut or a pecan, so we don't count that spot. Here's another area with some older trees. You saw this again. Now, you may need a chainsaw with some of these, but go ahead through and thin this out, picking your crop trees in that row. Now, this is a spot, the site that I'm on right now. This is what it will look like. And if the landowners are actually on this webinar, pay attention to this, because behind here, can you see a little bit of the ground, the brown behind there? That's the swale up above. And then this is a 20-foot section of trees. And then we go 50 feet, and there'll be another swale and a burn, 20-foot of trees, 50-foot of alley, 20-foot of trees. You can do it this way, you can do it that way. Doesn't matter, just know what you're doing. Is we're gonna go alley cropping here, actually silvopasture. We're gonna clear this out. We have a justification to do it because we're gonna do the water management system. That's wiping out this 50-foot wide area here. Then we'll grass it all in. We've got cows here, and we cash flow this next summer. And in part, this is what we're doing, is we're imitating what nature does. We're going to put in a lot of trees in the early years, have natural selection, and of course our own managed selection will remove the stems that are not fit for this site. They're the ones that are pest or disease susceptible, the ones that don't grow to the form that we want if we're looking for timber trees, that are not of a species that we don't want, the ones that don't produce nuts the way we want them to. All these different traits that we select for. And it also refers to another question that was asked last week, is like, do you attempt to select for more than one trait in your breeding work? It's like, well, absolutely, because I'm not selecting for the genetics of an individual. I'm selecting over time, a lifetime, and then the next lifetime, the next lifetime. I'm selecting for a suite of traits within the population. And so I can select for 4, 5, 6 different traits. I'm going to favor trees that have this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and if you don't have those traits, you're out of here. And so what happens, these are the only ones that survive, the ones that are cold hardy, disease resistant, pest resistant, produce young, and produce heavy, heavy crops. Those are my 5 selection criteria. Well, then after I remove the ones that don't meet that 5, or a couple of the 5, well, then the only ones reproducing are the ones that already have those genetics concentrated in them. Then the next time I go do a thinning, I'll remove the ones that, once again, don't meet my criteria, and I'm concentrating the site-adapted, favorable traits that I want for my population on the site. So this is back at New Forest Farm. You've seen this one before. This is a row of chestnuts. These are 3 feet apart. They're close enough together that there's a lot of them. At 3 feet apart, I believe this is 16-foot rows. Somebody can do the math on that, figure out what the stem density per acre is. It's a lot higher than it would be if it was an orchard, for example, which is like 58 trees per acre. They're close enough together that there's a lot of them, so I get genetics I can choose from. Yet they're not so close together that they're interfering with one another yet. It's going to be years before they interfere with one another yet. What are they going to have to do right away, though? They got to compete with an amazingly heavy sod. And if they're not competitive in the sod, they don't survive. And good riddance, because I'm going to be growing grass because I want to feed cows, I want to feed pigs, and any other animals that happen to walk by and eat grass. And this is what it looks like 12 years later. You turned it loose. Doesn't look like different species, of course. Doesn't look very similar to how thick things are on that property in Southern Virginia. Except they're doing loblolly pine, oak, and sweet gum are the majority of the plants. This was going right into an old cornfield. Immediately went to chestnut, apple, mulberry, raspberry. There's elderberries in there, grapes. See some raspberries right down here. You can see raspberries here, there's grapes. I think the grapes are climbing on a mulberry. There's hybrid poplar in the background. This just looks like a jungle mess. These are very neat, orderly rows of trees planted really, really close together, and they're beginning to interfere with one another. One of the trees interfering with them is black locust. Black locust also interferes with my tractor tires. What's nice about the black locust is when I do cut those down, I'm going to get a nitrogen flush. This is immediately after going through and cutting down the trees that are not the desired species. A lot of staghorn sumac, white ash, elms. And then I go through with the flail chopper, chip it all up. And then that's ramial wood chips grown right on site. And you just go through and you throw handfuls of Stropharia, winecap Stropharia mushroom spawn all over the place, and you have these beautiful random patches of mushrooms forever. They'll be here forever because they'll grow in the thatch of a sod too, not just on wood chips. And if you look at a stick, a young living stem, most of the nutrients in that plant are in the young living stems. So this is an amazingly rich fertilizer material, the ramial wood chips. And then just a few months later, you know, this, boom, pops into that. So right from there, look at this. From this mess to that chainsaw, and I've pulled just the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of firewood out here. I've been collecting the firewood off this plot because the sticks that are too big to chip up, I take those as firewood. And so you can see these are the ones that I'm going through later, and I'm recovering for firewood. The mushroom logs I already would have set aside. And then perfect grazing. You know, one entry into the site every 10, 11 years, and it's just loaded with grapes and berries and nuts and fruits, and I get beef off of it. This is a agriculturally productive system. And one of the real reason, really, why I want to plant with the highest density we possibly can, practically can, is how can we ever expect to find a superior plants unless, as a normal course of our farming, we do massive fitness screening like nature does, those little maple trees all over the ground. This is at the Woody Perennial Polyculture site when we first planted it. I think it's 5 years ago now. Kevin Wolves is there, and Peter Allen's feeding him the trees. There's one of the research blocks. It was a randomized block of alley cropping system. And through the years, this is like year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. Who's that fat bozo? So looking on right there. So finally, real hardcore research is being done at a number of universities now. This original site was like 8 acres. There's now like a 40-acre site that's doing it. University of Missouri Columbia is starting to get into it. Anybody associated with extension or universities, let's start researching food-producing plants grown as if they were a natural system. So of course we're going to choose the plants that are already part of a natural plant community. They're already associates with one another. We don't need to invent new guilds of plants. Wherever you go, like right here in North Carolina, on this particular site right here, we've got hickory, oak, beech, pecan, persimmon, pawpaw. That right there is the beginning. It's blackberries, raspberries. So 8 different crops, perennial woody crops right now. We do a strip cut to thin. We'll have faster growing timber, which is what this is, a timber site right now. It's supposed to be growing timber for the good old state of North Carolina as fast as we can. Well, we're going to be growing timber as fast as we can, and we're going to be growing these other crops for sale, and we're going to graze through the alleys with animals. And we need to do this far and wide. We're in all different climates. We're in all different latitudes, elevations, different soil types, hot, dry, sandy, clay, muck, Louisiana bayou country. This methodology is adapted and adaptable to every place on the planet except for Antarctica. And that's the range and extent of this type of restoration agriculture that we need to do, and that's what we're working toward, and that's why you guys are all part of this community. Now remember the fitness flexibility compromise. If we have all these plants that we select ruthlessly, they have to be adapted to these current site conditions. They're fit. But after a few years go down the line, they may become so specially adapted to that site that they could lose some of their flexibility. And the ultimate in loss of flexibility are endemic plants that are found on very specific sites. We're going to help to prevent endemism or land racing by bringing in new genetics constantly from north, south, east, west, other environments. It's like breeding cattle. We'll always bring in new prize bulls to spread their good luck among everybody. These are some of the sites with some particularly fantastic endemic plants with them. 20 years of provenance testing, managed selection as well as natural selection. It's disturbed the way nature would disturb it. We imitate fire, we imitate grazing. We use chainsaw and a brush hog to imitate fire and wind, and we use grazing to imitate grazing. The plasticity of the genotype combined with the mass selection breeding, our disturbance mimicry, this optimizes the total site yield while reducing input expenses. These apples and Asian pears were produced with 0 inputs. And if you want to see the return on investment, if it only cost me these many dollars to put the trees in the ground, there's a little bit of an expense. I had to pick them, so there's $1 per bushel to pick them. But what did I do? 0 sprays, no irrigation, and I actually got extra yields out of there because I'm grazing cattle, I'm grazing hogs. This is not an orchard. It follows nature's rules. The math is completely different. There's really nobody doing the math for us yet. Woody Perennial Polyculture Site is doing some of it. The Savannah Institute is doing some of it, but it's all in its infancy. One of the things that you can rest assured, go right here. This is Michigan State University, their webpage, all about chestnuts. It's probably one of the best sites for chestnut information out there. Read it. It's accurate. It's factual. Much of it doesn't apply to us because we are not growing an orchard. We're growing a natural system. We're growing a savanna system. Our yields may be less, but our expenses are way less, and we have additional revenue streams, which just drove me nuts about some of this research report. I put it together for a client. This particular, on that particular website, was talking about it's going to cost you $7 grand an acre to get it established with all the different, the fertilizers that it needs, the trees, the irrigation, and then it's going to be about $3,000 an acre per year, for about 7 years before you get a return on investment. I added that all up. So let's see, 10 acres of these expensive grafted chestnuts at $7 grand for all the bells and whistles and irrigation. That's 70 grand out already. And then in 3 times 10 acres is 30 grand for 7 years. So 30 times 7 is 21,000. No, 30 times 7 is $210,000 before I start getting a return on investment. That's, excuse me, people, that's insanity. Let's plant some inexpensive seedling material. Yes, let's get it from selected seedlings that are already out there. And we know that we're going to get a lower yield possibly, but we're going to get cattle, we're going to get hogs, we're going to have wildlife, we're going to have turkeys, we're going to give tours. We're doing breeding work. We now can participate and sell seeds from hyper-precocious plants to nurseries. This is not an orchard. It doesn't follow nature's rules. It is not as expensive to do as this. This is one of the best sites for chestnut information, but not all of it applies. And I'll probably get, somebody's going to flame me for saying that. Your efforts are going to outlive you and will continue to yield in perpetuity. Most people won't recognize what you're doing. And most of you looking at these pictures don't even recognize what's going on. Can you believe all this? Look at this. This is all food, period, 100% food. And I have done nothing here for 10 years, more than 10 years. This is my property up in Maine, northeastern Maine. And we can have Bubba Joe and his cousin drive by down here looking for deer. They don't see nothing. Let's say they're running away from the zombies in the city. We got to find a garden because we're going to starve. They just go driving right by my place because they don't recognize this. This is 100% garden. This is not a cute little permaculture food forest. This is a natural system, managed like a natural system, using plant community mimics. And there's food all over the place. If I don't want to go pick the food, I can go send the pigs loose and they can go pick the food for me. Generations later, people will not recognize what you're doing. And I'm going to rip with this for a little while. Reason being, I tried to show this last week. This is in the northern Italian Alps. There are communities that were here for 2,000 years plus. And you can see some. This is some of one little community here. And all of this area here is all terraced, stone terraces, and this is where the lookout tower is. It looks out the valley this way and across the valley that way. People have lived here for thousands of years. How the heck did they do it? These obviously were the mountain people. During World War II, the Axis never really got going because Mussolini had problems with these people up here. Because he said, hey, we're all going to be fascists and everybody's going to be happy. And they say, screw you, you know, we're independent, we're on our own. They had a cheese co-op that you would just bring your milk down, you pour it into the jug, that mark how much you brought down on a chalkboard on a piece of slate, and then the creamery would make cheese, and then they would take 20% of the cheese to sell in town to make money to keep their business operational. And then whenever you needed cheese for your family, you just come in and you grab it. No money needed. Then you bring your grapes down in the fall. That, you know, how many grapes did you bring in? They press it all out. They keep track of all of that. They take 20% to sell for cash in town to keep their business afloat. Whenever you need wine, you come down and you fill up your jug. And you bring your grains down, because on the terraces, you kind of see some of these lines. On the terraces, they'd grow wheat. You bring your grains down, they grind it all up. They make bread. Whenever you need bread, you just grab some bread and take it. Zero cash economy for the people who are actually producing. And then what they would do with their grazing animals, this is where they'd send them up in the summertime, up in the high country in these pastures up there. So, of course, Mussolini didn't like that. He wants you to be good market citizens. So there was a civil war during World War II that really there's not a lot talked about, the civil war in Italy. And these mountain people basically blew stuff up left and right because they're good working with stone. Mussolini rounded them up, put them to work in the factories and down in the fields, and then all the land has been abandoned since World War II. Well, now the grandkids of the settlers that live there, this is where their family comes from, they say, hey, you know, we own a piece of land way the heck up in the mountains, let's figure it out. In Italy, up in this part of Italy, they had what was called the frazione system, and that every generation, so if you got a whole piece of land, say 100 acres, the next generation is 5 people that own it, the next generation is 50 people that own it, and so on and so on. So these little teeny tiny plots of land, sometimes 20 and 30 people own it at a time. And it's a real legal challenge to sort it out, but there are people going back to their villages. This is the road. It's a line of rocks on either side, and there's some places that's carved into the hillside, some places the stones are laid. 1,200-year-old road. And do you see what's going on here? Look at the trees. Look at the trees. Look at the vegetation. 100%. 100% edible. These gigantic old open-grown chestnuts, all these young ones have grown up underneath it. There's basswood. There's walnuts, you know, like walnuts. Here's one of the terraces. The trees on the edge of the terrace, and this is opened up a little bit. They'll try to start gardening in there. As you come up across the ravine, this is the arch where the billy goat gruff stands there. There's a little water fountain that's piped in here with stone carved pipes. And there's a little cubby hole right there where the knight in shining armor would wait and step out and say, hey, you're not from around here, and throw you in the ditch if you're not polite. And grapes hanging on the wall. The wall had all kinds of culinary herbs growing on it. This is like permaculture 2,000 years ago. That's the view from in the village. It's a nice place to sit down and enjoy some wine with friends. These stone houses, it's dry laid stone, no mortar. The roofs are made out of stone as well. So what do you have? Here's the resources at hand. Maybe we should make a cob oven. No. This is stone country, big stones. And look at the vegetation. Apples, pears, and ruins. These buildings are like just overgrown with trees. And what are these grapevines doing climbing all over things? And what's this tree here? What are these shrubs all over the place? Yeah, these are hazelnuts and walnuts and pears and cherries and, you know, grapes again on these stone terraces, and asparagus. How long has that asparagus been there? You know, could be thousands of years old. Surrounded by an amazing diversity of food plants absolutely everywhere. Nobody would recognize this. The kids who moved back here, you know, they're in their 20s and 30s or whatever. They're like, yeah, but how could we ever survive here? And I'm going like, oh my God, you want me to come help you do a perennial restoration agriculture system? You're in paradise. There's figs that growing around here. There's olives that will grow here. Obviously pears And some more pears over there. This is like 900% food. This is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful setup. Once you've got your system in place, nothing has been done to this management-wise since World War II, and it's still there, and it's still productive. Tribal leaders and kings and queens and politicians, the controlling businesses, and even religions have come and gone during the lifetime of this village. This ecosystem has persisted for thousands of years, and it'll continue to do so for thousands of years to come. That's the work that we're engaged in. We are the ones that are planting the abundant future that our descendants can inherit. I'm not about to stand around and watch my planet get turned into a wasteland without picking up a shovel and a grafting knife and a couple of seedlings and sticking them in the ground as often as I can. And that's why I'm here in North Carolina, actually. So thank you for tolerating me tonight, folks. I'll take questions for a while. I don't have to go to any meetings tonight. It's great.
Wow, Mark, that was awesome as always. There are a few questions, and I'm sure there'll be more. So let me just go up here. And so this one was back a ways. It was Ray asking it, and you might have to ask this again, Ray, because this is about halfway through, and you were talking about some trees, and it was right after your woodland owner notes, and she asked, is age a factor here? You may have to go back and ask. I'm not sure Mark's going to remember what he was talking about or age. But while you're thinking of that, Ray, Mary asks, what species for mushroom logs? And I know you've addressed this before, and then let me just finish. She has one more. How do you decide the best width of allium trees? So that's Mary asking the same question. Two questions. Excuse me.
With alleys and trees, the ones that we saw tonight were based solely on the equipment that the landowner already had. Their forestry mulcher, they bought it specifically for this job. They wanted to have it around, and they'll use it for years to come, and they'll be able to rent themselves out to others in the area. That was 8-foot wide cutting head. So we wanted to make everything in multiples of 8, and the alleys multiples of 2, either 2 times 8, 4 times 8, 6 times 8. That way you can go up and back and be efficient with use in the field. And it's adjusted, it's designed for your equipment. So that's just how I do it. You can make it as wide as you want, as narrow as you want. For you saw some of those strip cuts with the pine in it. I don't think I have to go too far back to find the pine strip cuts. If you want to have the forest resource regenerate, you want to have your cleared spaces, your clear cuts, no more than 2 times the height of the mature trees. I guess it is quite here. Let's go back one more. Like here. If you have a row of trees here and then a row of trees there, that's not quite 2 times the height. That means that the center of this alley will still stay shaded, and it will be cooler, and seed is more likely to regenerate from the trees on either side. We're not necessarily looking for natural regeneration of trees, but actually what we are looking to do is in this row here is to find some really fast growing trees that are doing really well, thin this row down faster than these rows, and eventually eliminate this row. So we'll have, that'll be 16, and 16 is 32 plus 8 is 40 foot in that alley. Then we'll remove the next 8, and that's 48, and then 16 is 55, somewhere in there. So, and then the 50-ish is a good width for a 4 passes with a pull behind hay blind. So this right here, believe it or not, is designed for a pull behind hay blind. But it was designed around the forestry mulcher that we have on site. Now, as refers to age, I don't know if this is answering the question that was asked, but this tree right here, that's an old tree for that size. There's a reason why it didn't grow as fast as it could. A loblolly pine, that should be 12 to 14 inches in diameter by 25 years. They're amazingly fast-growing trees. That's why so much of the South is converted to those, because you can plant it and have a turnaround in a lifetime. Some reason why that didn't grow. It's either the genetics of that plant, it sucks, The soil is too tight or too acidic or too alkaline, something, I don't know what. This tree will not respond to thinning. Um, Actually, that's fascinating because see this area here? There were no trees out here except for persimmons, and there was a lot of lichen and moss. So I wonder if there was something that happened here a long time ago, and whatever happened with soil chemistry here caused that pine to grow slower. So this tree may not grow as fast as a younger tree would that's more vigorous. So what you want to do is you want to catch these trees as soon as they accelerate and hit their fastest growth period, keep them in that fast growth period in perpetuity, and you'll be optimizing the yield of that. So that's somewhat related to age.
Super. Let's see. Next one from Jian. Where can we find more info about this group of Italian people? It is a beautiful system.
One of the villages that's experiencing somewhat of a renaissance is called Trontano, Trontano. And like many young kids, I'll call them hippies, even though they aren't like what I grew up with, like the first generation of real hippies. These are like the modern hippie kids. They get together and they have a couple of fab labs and maker shops, and I've seen way too many of ventures like that have disintegrated into total chaos. But whatever's happened with these guys is they've got their act together. They built this beautiful common building that's like a cafeteria, restaurant, snack bar, and they host music events and art festivals, and that's part of their revenue generation. And most of their revenue generation, believe it or not, ends up going towards legal fees, because when there's 100 people that own a quarter acre of land and a ruined building, you got to sort through it. Because we could have bought this building, it's like a 5-story building, stair-stepped into the mountain. You could buy the building and the land for like $5,000, but the legal fees would be about $50,000. But Trontano, and it happens to be the home of Giacomo de Cardoni, who was a late Renaissance painter, and he probably painted the most Salvador Dali-esque type paintings that you've seen him somewhere. You see these really twisted, Renaissance paintings. That's de Cardoni. Beautiful
Cool.
place.
Well, yeah, it's a gorgeous place, amazing. Leslie just gives a comment. Leslie's in Spain. The stone terraces you just mentioned in Italy is exactly what our area here is like in Spain. Some going back to the Romans. Same here in the Spanish Civil War. Most plots are 1.5 to 3 hectares, but now everything in the valley is bare thanks to the weed killer.
Yeah.
So there's a, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Lisa, this is awesome. Maybe the best yet. Awesome episode. So she's just thanking you. Really amazing presentation. Mark killed it. Amen, Mark. Fantastic as always from Nick. Fantastic from Mary. Triple odds. When you show the picture, go ahead.
I said we'll go back to boring next week. All right. Anyways, what picture?
So here's Ray. She did go back, so she's gone back. When you showed the pic of the trees and asking why one is crowding out more than the others. Let's see, did she keep going? No, then. So that's when she asked the question earlier, what is age a factor here? Remember when you had, Mark, there were a bunch of,
those
those
were all the exact same age. All of them were exact. They were planted at the same exact time. So that had something to do with something. What we don't know, and what we don't really care. We're going to select for the values that we want. Is it timber production? Well, doggone it, it's going to be that timber tree right there. Is it going to be nut production? Well, we're going to get rid of that timber tree and go for the one that's producing more nuts. So those were all, that the reason why I showed that is because they were all planted the same day with the same piece of equipment, direct seeded.
Awesome. I have a question. I'm going to ask you just a minute, but Jen is great question, and I'm going to tell you, Jen, that we're working on this. So Jen, as you know, Mark, he's been with us several weeks. He readily admits he's just a novice. He's from Australia. He's an immigrant. But he says, "Thank you so much, Mark. Do you have a training course for a freshman?" As he knows, this is a graduate.
You're in it.
New to what.
You're in it.
Uh, and so Ray says yes after your question there, your answer. Leslie says, "Thanks, Mark. Do you have problems with procession caterpillars with your pines?" And then if the answer is yes, any advice whether you do or not, I guess. So
Here's one of the interesting things. I was not planning on touching on population ecology at all in this particular series of webinars, maybe some future time. One of the things with pests, you cannot get pest control unless you have enough pests to supply a food or a strata for some organism. You have to have enough cucumber beetles in order to support a population of predators of cucumber beetles. The same with those caterpillars. You have to have enough of them to support a population of fungus or viruses that affect those caterpillars. And what typically happens is something that can reproduce really fast, like a caterpillar. It can really ramp up fast and hammer your trees for a period of years, and you lose tons of them. Look at bark beetle through the Rockies all the way up into Alaska. It's like hundreds, if not thousands, of square miles sometimes of trees dying all over the place. Well, that's called nature, and it just happens. Some things cannot happen on the point scale. They have to happen at the landscape scale. So I'm going through an issue right now on some of my pines with question mark caterpillars. You go near them, they all stop and they stand up and they look like a question mark. And they really are hammering a lot of my trees. And one of the things that I've done for 22 years now is, okay, we're going to use population ecology to control our populations. If we have a pest that ramps up its population, we're just going to let it, because there will come a time when that pest will be controlled. One of the things that might control that pest population is when it eats every last pine on my property. However, since I'm paying attention to what's going on in actual reality, instead of fighting against the pest, I'm looking to see what's thriving, what's doing really well. Now that I've got this defoliated pine, the blueberries are really starting to crank, or the hazelnuts are doing really well, the raspberries are coming in. So what's coming in around, under, near the trees that are stressed from the caterpillar, and I'll go in and I'll go plant high density to get our total genetic selection there. So I'm keeping an eye on the effects. What is the actual disturbance effect of these caterpillars defoliating that tree? What's the disturbance effect on the individual tree? What's the disturbance effect on the populations of trees that it affects? What's the disturbance effect on the other species around those trees? Because if you look at, especially caterpillars, a lot of them are host specific. They will only eat this kind of tree. Well, fine, they don't eat another kind of tree, so I plant another kind of tree. I can have caterpillars and butterflies all over the place, and they don't bother that tree because they're interested in eating this tree. That's how I deal with it, is as an ecologist. And people say, "Oh, you can't do that commercially; it doesn't work." Well, it's been working for me for 20 years. It's been working for nature for however many, 6,000 anyways, right? Why not try? Why not try imitating nature and figure out what is happy in a place where those pines are not doing as well because of the particular caterpillars? I'd also put up nest boxes for wrens. Wrens, bluebirds aren't so much like weird caterpillar eaters, but man, oh man, the little house wrens, I've seen them chomp on some pretty ugly, nasty looking caterpillars before, and try to fatten up the night predators, bat houses, so they'll eat, if it's a moth that's making a caterpillar, instead of a butterfly that'll be flying at night, have bats out there to start limiting that. Have little frog ponds all over the place, your pocket ponds, so you have a rich amphibian population, as many predatory animals that eat insects that we can get, guineas, quail, right now. I took pictures here at this place where you saw the pictures of me doing the rule of thumb for the basal area of those pines. The whole understory in that area has just been it's all scratched up by chickens and guineas. The people who live here have a flock of semi-wild chickens and guineas. They're just all over the place in the woods. They eat a tremendous amount of insects every single day. So all those different things to fatten up the ecosystem is what I would do. Let's take a couple more and call it a night.
Yeah. And then there's they realize it's late and they're backing off. Mary's got a great one though. And Mary's always so. I'm gonna make sure I state this right. You said you were trying to produce landrace species through selecting, but in this talk, you said about not landrace by bringing in the equivalent of new bull. I think she might have been a new bull every few years, and then she says, "Isn't that a conflict?"
Well, no, it's not a conflict. What it is if you get a landrace, it's totally site adapted. It is at risk now of being an endemic species, and it cannot survive anywhere else. So we're going to be bringing in new genetics of new varieties, because what happens if you don't have this constant crossing in and out, it's a migration of species. I'm constantly going to be bringing in migration to keep the gene pool full of variants, and believe me, if it's susceptible to a disease, it either dies or I cut it down. If it's not productive, I cut it down and make mushroom logs out of it. Well, then I'm always also sending genetic material out. So it's not in conflict. It's just that land racing, we want to get as close to a land race, but not quite go into the limits that being endemic would be. We still want to have that. We still want to have the flexibility to be able to move it around, and the flexibility is also important for unstable climate and new things get thrown at you. So it's not in conflict. It's just that by grabbing genetics, let's take chestnuts as an example. I'll grab chestnut genetics from all over the world, plant them on my farm, and let the weak ones die, and the ones that aren't fit for this site, they die. Well, the ones that are now a little bit more site adapted than the overall population was, and the next generation, they're more adapted, and they're more adapted. What they're doing is they're becoming a land race. They are becoming more endemic. Well, now we're going to bring in, instead of a whole population of other plants, we're going to bring in individuals with traits that we want. So we're going to keep a certain influx of new genetic material coming in, so we don't lose traits and we don't become totally endemic. So we'll be very site adapted and land race, but not endemic. That make sense?
Does to me. I'm sure Mary would have gotten that. And then last question, easy one, I think. Jen just asked again, could you just spell that Italian group name again? I think he wants to research it. So
the town is Trontano, Trontano.
So Mark, here's my answer I gave it. Here's the telephone tag. I said it was Torontonto, so I spelled it Torontonto. So Gian, I hope you got that from Mark. And he said thanks. Guys, we all got to just, every week Mark is just breathing this into us. So thank you, man. I'll talk on Friday. Everybody, we've got one session tomorrow. Just we're not having sustainable design. I changed it on the calendar just a little while ago.